he said, "Quit putting words in my mouth." "What do you mean?" I said, "Give me an example." Wait, let's back up. I'd said something, stated it very carefully, I thought, and still think, and this is in the midst of a mid-morning conversation between the two of us, which had just moments earlier been interrupted unceremoniously by total stranger Tom, taking his cue and pulling over his chair from something he had overheard one of us say about the economy. This was 3 days ago, so my memory's a little bit fuzzy, but I said something, called it an observation, and that's what this is about, I think. I would nearly swear to it. Anyway, I told this guy whose name I won't use that I had, pardon the interruptions outside, I'm in a third world country and there's no accounting for what you might hear out there. There's actually horses pulling carts selling milk, for God, if you can imagine such a thing, and chickens running wild. Anyway, I told this guy whose name, as I believe I said a moment ago, I'm not going to use, that I had thought about something that he'd said a few days earlier, an observation he'd made, was the way I put it, as I recall. Now, the observation, as I remember having recollected and verbalizing slowly to this guy, whose name I won't use, was about his comment on a photograph he'd seen in the International Herald Tribune, a photograph of Barack Obama, later, well, we'll talk about him later, surrounded by members of his new administration. Now, what had caught this guy, whose name I won't use, his attention, as I recalled, was the look on the faces of those people looking on, as Obama was casually talking and signing bills, shutting down this and that and starting up something else, presumably. Now, my recollection about that, this guy whose name I won't use as observation, as I was carefully recreating it there at the table in front of him and Tom, was that this guy, whose name I won't use, had said, I thought I recalled or remembered to the best of my knowledge, not the only point he made, certainly, but the central point, it seemed, that the people looking on were looking askance, is the word that comes to mind now. That is not the word this guy, whose name I won't use, used, or I used then. Circumspect comes to mind now as I try to think what I thought this guy, whose name I won't use, said. Again, not the word he used or the word I used to try to describe what I thought he said. Now, a worried look, what are we in for? Yeah, I know we all agree to this, but yikes, he's really doing it. Something like that. Not in those words, but that was the gist of it, I thought. And had thought about it and was offering a response after having thought about it, which I think is preferable to responding before having thought about it. Keeping in mind all the while that there's nothing absolutely true about it, only the way I felt or thought as he said these things about that. Again, not exactly the words I used in my observation, but more or less. Now, and this is when he said, there you go, putting words in my mouth. You always do that. Or did he say that, or am I putting words in his mouth now as I write this recollection about that? I can't be absolutely sure what he said, because when he spoke, I was, as he said, interpreting and representing what he said to myself in the form of a thought. I mean, he didn't say that, but that's what he meant, I think. I'm pretty damn sure. That's the way it goes. No, these thoughts which I had carried with me and thought about for several days following, and was now expressing this that had revolved around in my mind, it was now being put back into words as we spoke. Maybe not the same exact words, although I would swear the words, putting words in my mouth, are verbatim. So we'll put them in italics if I ever get the opportunity. But that those words I would nearly almost completely swear to, if I can swear to anything. But then again, I can't. I can't swear to it, I guess. Stop. Now let's get back again. I left something out. I had, after recalling what I thought he said, in the form of, let's call it an observation, made a second or third observation, and I stated it succinctly, I think. Or succinctly enough, if you can ever say something succinctly enough. I said, not exactly these words, but essentially, and here's the point I had worked so hard to set up, that there were no surprises around the table or desk of Barack Obama there in the Oval Office. That anything he was doing at that moment had been planned and rehearsed and thought out and agreed to for weeks and weeks and months. Certainly from that moment when the thought became clear that he was likely to be the next president of the United States, or could very well be the next president. Whenever a thought like that would take form, it could have been a long time ago, but let's say, for the sake of discussion, since he was elected, which was a couple of months back, so no surprises. I mean, he didn't just wake up and say, you know what, Michelle, I think I'm going to close Guantanamo today. Then, any look of surprise or any interpretation of the possibility of any actual surprise, real or imagined, no matter what the look on anybody's face, had nothing to do with the shutting down of this or that or the starting up of something else. That is what I stated as an observation to this guy, whose name I won't use, in the front of Tom. And furthermore, this was expressed probably with a certain amount of certainty on my part, and if thinking about it, I'm still certain of it. And it was then that he said, "You are putting words in my mouth." And surprised, taken aback, you could say, I heard myself say, as my namesake Dick Cavett always puts it, I'm sorry if I did that, I didn't mean to. I was just trying to make conversation for one thing. But also to make a point I thought worth making for another thing. Maybe there are other reasons, not about the weather or the price of groceries, although those things are important too. But hey, let's talk epistemology here. I've loved to talk epistemology for years and bring it up every chance I get, ever since I looked it up and more or less figured out what it meant during the course of the O.J. Simpson murder trial. And after having read one of the most sane editorials I've ever read by former Los Angeles District Attorney Vincent Bugliosi, may he live forever. And I like the way it sounds. And I mean, what are we talking about? That's the question. No? Or why talk at all? If we're not talking about anything, and a cucumber is not a cucumber, but a can of sweet relish. But to the point, I promise. This guy, whose name I won't use, completely denied not ever having said what I said he said, but not meaning what I said I thought he meant when he said it. What he meant, he went on to say, after I heard myself asking him then, please tell me what he had meant to say, was indeed nothing at all about the people around the table looking circumspect or in disbelief or askance, but something completely different. And what was that? I asked for clarification. And he said something which I don't remember except that it clarified absolutely nothing. Again, those were not his exact words, but nothing to do with anything of what I had thought he said, that I'd completely misheard and misrepresented him, and therefore, for whatever reasons I might have, had put these, my words, in his mouth. And that I did it all the time. In a slightly defensive vein, I remember hearing myself say that I was not lying. That was a word I used, at least intentionally, and that I was open then and now to being corrected and saying this about what I thought he had said. I remember the words in Spanish crossing my mind. I do not remember if I said them aloud or not. I don't think so. Yes, maybe I did. But very quickly, almost under my breath, corrígame si estoy equivocado. Correct me if I am wrong. But he missed that and heard only the word lie and said, see, you're saying that I called you a liar. And I said, no, I'm not saying you called me a liar. I'm only saying that I didn't. Well, if you don't like the word lie, let's use the word misrepresent, at least intentionally. And indeed, not to anyone but you. And now our new friend Tom here. What I thought you said. Well, lying and misrepresenting are very different Tom interjected, and Dan oops, agreed. Chasing that semantic rabbit, I don't know where. Now Tom's sitting there with a big, no matter where to say it, shit-eating grin, so happy to see this guy, whose name I won't use, seemingly getting the best of me. So, lying or misrepresenting, take your pick, but I didn't intentionally do either. And the thought, although I didn't express it aloud, was whether or not George Bush or I could have thought Colin Powell, for a slightly different effect, lied or misrepresented the reasons for the U.S. going to war against Iraq. But I didn't say that, I'm sure. Absolutely. And I'm glad, because I don't know where that would have taken us. As you may recall, I had asked for an example of my habit of putting words into this guy whose name I won't use his mouth, and he gave me one, although he didn't want to talk about it. He said, because he didn't want to give it any importance. I think that was what he said, something like that. The day before, this guy whose name I won't use, and a completely toxic and obnoxious fellow whose name I will also not use, the three of us had lunch, and I had, this guy whose name I won't use said, to give me an example, assumed and said aloud that I thought this guy whose name I won't use and the second guy whose name I will not use were in agreement on whatever subject we were talking about, religion, philosophy, or art or something. They would technically be putting the second guy's words in his mouth. No? Anyway, he said this was absolutely wrong. He did not agree with the second guy, and as a matter of fact, normally does not say anything, only listens. Same guy here today told me since his writing was so bad in school, he was allowed to speak his theme papers. Since the written form was nearly incomprehensible. He can talk about half an hour without stopping or apparently realizing it. So I guess this is a good place to take a breath, and this spot within this written account, which attempts to recreate and clarify, hope it has some impressions on what I thought somebody said, who said they didn't say it, and charging quite vehemently that I apparently felt some habitual need to put words into other people's mouth, namely his. How can you argue? If that is what he thought, that's what he thought, and apparently he had thought about it. I thought about what this guy whose name I won't use said about this alleged habit of mine. To say I do not like to have words put into my mouth, but I do not know what to do. If someone says something, it does tend to make me think he said something. And when I attach a meaning to what I think he said and then try to express it, does that constitute putting words in his mouth? I'll have to think about it. And after having thought about it, I'll tell you the truth. I think this guy, whose name I won't use, is an imbecile. And I also think, like so many people, this guy whose name I won't use loves to talk. And is obviously unconscious and does not even realize that he loves to talk and does not like his words to be examined at all. This way doesn't have to mean anything, epistemologically or any other way of speaking, and never has to commit to having said or meant anything about anything. That's what I think about this guy whose name I won't use, and every Tom and Dick and Harry, and at least 95% of everybody else I've tried to talk to and make sense out of for a long, lonely time. Part of what I'm absolutely certain, come to think of it, is symptomatic of the insanity that is steadily eating away at us. But that said, in the words of Spiro Agnew, my solemn motto hereafter will be, nolo contendere.